Hello and welcome. This is the Mutiny Investing Podcast. This podcast features long-form conversations on topics relating to investing, markets, risk, volatility, and complex systems.
So a couple of weeks ago, you told me an anecdote, and I love a good anecdote that comes out of left field that I would never have thought about before. But you told me that hay prices, like hay is about to be a problem. Like we're talking about the bullwhip effects of supply chains and everything. But then you started telling me as a rancher, dealing with hay now because of the drought in California, hay may become a future problem that I should be keeping my eye on. So tell me like kind of what's going on with the hay market nationally.
That's a great thing to start off with. All of our animals eat hay, and so we buy a lot of it. So our two ranches are located in Colorado and Texas. So we have two different, hay markets between the two locations. And as with any futures market or any agricultural market, you'll have a national kind of aggregated number, and then you'll have more localized and regional markets. And so as it pertains to various droughts going on at different points in time across the country, California is kind of a year ahead of where Texas is right now in terms of going through a drought. And what do I mean by that? Well, the effects of what are happening in Texas right now are what was seen, say, maybe last year in California. And so because California is ahead of the curve compared to, say where we are, east of there, it means that producers are going to follow the money. And so right now, if there's no hay in California and the demand is there, limited supply, then prices are going to go up, classic demand curve. So producers, say in Utah, that might be able to go either direction, all of a sudden they're looking towards California because if they can get, say, 500 a ton or something like that, then they're going to go get that there. And all of a sudden, a couple of years ago when I could, get it for less than 200 a ton or something like that, now I'm looking at over 200 a ton. Prices are going to be, moving up in some areas. They might already even be 300 a ton. And so what we are seeing right now through our stock contractor, rodeo stock contractor friends, is they're getting, some of the word on the street because they travel around to Arizona and Utah to all of these different rodeos, bringing stock in for the rodeo. Could be a bronco, or it could be a Corriente cow, or what have you, that is coming in for the weekend of the PRCA rodeo, and they're hearing from their hay broker friends that the Utah or say even Arizona hay is heading west to California because prices are so high. So hay that maybe we would have gotten here in Colorado is going out there. So where are we going to get it? Well, Texas is in a massive drought down there right now, and people are destocking their cattle like crazy, even horses, because all of a sudden there's no grass for them to eat, and that means that there's no hay that's being planted or wheat, and so on and so forth. And the knock-on effects really, are prevalent, and I think that we are going to see higher commodity prices, higher input prices as we march through this thing. And it's going to take some time for it to all happen, of course, because the ag industry is a slow-moving industry. But ultimately, I think we are already feeling the pinch here. We just had 2 truckloads of hay get delivered, and it was expensive. But ultimately, we need really high-quality alfalfa for our broodmares that might have a foal on their side and maybe are pregnant again right now. And so, for those horses, we have to have really good feed. And so we have a choice. We can either, pay up for it, or we could destock a horse. But if we have a really high caliber performance horse out in the pasture that has a foal on her side, that foal's future value is well worth some additional input costs. And ultimately, that does meander its way into something like the horse market.
So this is going to be my favorite kind of podcast because I get to ask a series of dumb questions. It's only going to be dumb questions from here on out. So part of it, I was thinking about when you're saying that. So would we not really see the full effects, like you're saying, during the summertime? I assume, right, they're out grazing, but like if you had drought in Texas or Colorado, there's not going to be high quality grass. So you're trying to increase the quality of grass. But I would think you're not going to really see the hay prices move through the system more towards until the winter. But so is it more of like the seasonality? Like you're seeing it now, but you're going to say we're going to start seeing maybe news headlines like this winter with hay prices. And then part of it, what you're just saying with high performance horses, does the silage content matter? Like you were saying with the alfalfa content and everything. So it's very specific states or regions that you want to be getting hay from. I know that's like a two-parter and totally divergent two parts, but I'm just curious your thoughts.
Yeah. So we're already buying hay for the winter. We already had some previously bought. It's in a hay shed. We just had the 2 truckloads that just arrived. Those are for this winter as well. So in Colorado, in southern Colorado where we are, we do get over 100 inches of snow every winter. And so, when there's a foot of snow on the ground, there's nothing for them to eat. And what would be left at that point would not be very high quality. It's more filler. It's not really, the same nutritional value that you would have during, say, this time of year when we're very green and lush and whatnot. And so if we're talking about protein contents, alfalfa might have, say, up to 20% protein in it. Oat hay might be, say, 8 or 9%, things like that. And so different types of hay have different protein contents. And so when you have a high octane performance horse, they are burning a lot of calories. They're working very hard. They need very high quality feed. Cows also need high quality feed, but they eat all day, every day. And so, they're kind of different seasons to their life as well. And if you're talking about, a grass-fed and grass-finished cow that you want to, have, say, on good finishing ground like we have here in Colorado, that high-protein hay is going to go a long way. If you have to, grass finish a cow in the middle of the winter, you better have some really good hay in the barn so you can make sure that protein on somebody's plate is going to be what they expect. The other question you asked about the location of hay and where it comes from and things like that. I know a ranch down in Texas that trucks hay all the way in from Wyoming because they think that hay is that good. You would think in a world of $6 diesel that maybe this year they don't do that. I don't know. I haven't talked to them about that yet, but people will truck hay in that they think can make a difference in their animals' lives. Kentucky is famous for bringing in hay from, say, even out here in Gunnison County. So it's not irregular for people to truck hay all over the place, especially if they think it'll give their animal an edge. But at the same time, if you run out of feed and your back is against a wall and you got to go to your local feed shop and pay through the nose for a couple of bales until you can get something delivered, people will do that, and it'll probably be lower quality and cost a lot more. But their animal will stay fed, maybe not as nutritionally dense, as the producer may like, but you don't always have a choice in ranching.
You brought up another topic. So there's so many actually you brought up. I can't wait to ask you about. One was, as you know, I live in a pseudo farming community here with growing grapes. But what's great is where I go get my my coffee every morning is basically attached to a gas station that's primarily a diesel station where all of the farmers that are filling up in the morning. And I was looking at the diesel pump yesterday, and the price was $856 for the guy that filled up whatever is like 125 gallons or whatever. And so like you're talking about whether it's hay input costs or diesel input costs. But the other thing I didn't have time to look up. I'm curious if you know the difference. I did notice on the pump though the other day it's like you have off-road diesel and on-road diesel. Do you know what like the differences are? I don't mean to put you on the spot with that one.
Yeah. Green diesel would be your on-road diesel, and that is what truckers have to use on the highway. There are various laws that exist, and so you have to have that high-quality diesel on the highway for emissions reasons and whatnot. Red diesel would be your off-road diesel, and that would be what the tractor is running on out in the field. It costs less. It doesn't burn as clean and things like that. And so there are two types of diesel. Somebody asked me recently, an astute market participant asked me, well, why is gasoline, this price, and why is diesel that price? And we started talking about it a little bit. And I said, you know what, if I really knew the real answer, I'd probably just get upset, as to, why I'm paying so much more for diesel as I am, regular gasoline, unleaded. But there are some things where ignorance is bliss. That one might be one of it. I'm sure one of your listeners can tell us exactly what's going on there. And I would welcome it, although I should probably not do it on screen so you don't see my head explode.
Exactly. Or it's like, then we have to start getting into crack spreads and the lack of capex and refining manufacturing facilities within the US. And then we start getting into that. Because like a lot of people don't realize everybody's looking at crude oil prices, but the crack spreads have exploded between crude to refined products from anywhere from like $15 to $20 a barrel up to like 70 to 80. So that's why the prices at the pump we've seen in the last year are pretty dramatically different from crude oil, because you just had this perfect storm, I think, on the capex side of refining, and especially the lack of refining capacity we kind of have in this country. But part of it, what are you seeing then from the diesel perspective? Are you still concerned, or do you think we're kind of past the hump in diesel? And I know this is all speculative from your perspective, but like, or do you expect prices to kind of go back up? And do you help mitigate those prices by doing grass-fed, grass-finished cattle and trying to avoid using diesel as much as possible?
Yeah, in our business, we're in the grass-fed, grass-finished business, and so I'm not buying grains like corn, for example, to finish these cows. When we get to that point with some of them, I'd say that if you think about say a feed yard that has a reliance on silage or corn or what have you. What a lot of people don't necessarily understand is that the grain producers use a lot of propane to dry their product before it ends up leaving. And one of the reasons for the propane is because most of these people are out in the middle of nowhere and they don't have the electricity. And I guess it's probably more efficient to use the propane for the dryers. I forget who it was. It might have been Doomberg. Yeah, it was Doomberg put out a note a month or two ago about the national propane shortage, and we messaged about it very briefly, and basically the takeaway was store as much as you can, and so to your question about fuel prices and everything else, I mean, we've got storage tanks for diesel and whatnot, and so every time we need to fill one of those tanks, we're making a call on the directionality of one of these inputs. And so let's say it's a 2,000 gallon tank or something like that. That can be a pretty expensive, pretty expensive moment. And it makes sense to study these markets to try to make a call on, if I think there's a near-term transition in the price action that's about to happen, maybe I want to wait, or maybe I want to jump in right now. As for, say, the price specifically in diesel, I don't know. Obviously, the price per barrel of oil has come down more significantly than the price at the pump, as you articulated a minute ago. We've just kind of gotten used to operating in a world with higher input costs, and we are charging more on the back end. One of our restaurant partners that we sell a lot of ground beef to, for example, they've got 6 restaurants, and I called them up and I said, hey, I need to raise your price to X, and they didn't even blink an eye. It was not a problem, not an issue. They knew what was going on. They see it across the board. They're increasing their prices in lockstep with their producers. And so the pass-through of some of these costs are definitely showing up to the consumer, I would say. And it'll be interesting this earnings season to see what's going on with a number of the big companies out there, that are in this space, like General Mills and whatnot. But I would say that, for somebody that's kind of gotten used to elevated prices, I almost think about it a little bit differently, as opposed to, hey, it might go up and come back down. It's almost kind of like we took a stair step up and we're operating on this level now. And it's a little bit easier to operate the business and just saying, these are my input costs. If I have a hope and a dream that they're going to go back down so my margins expand, if that doesn't happen, then maybe I go out of business. So I better get used to operating in a higher elevated market. And I'd say that to have pricing power, and we do have some pricing power as a producer, if we can use that pricing power while these things are happening to us, then we can maintain our profitability and we can continue doing what we do. But if we don't have that pricing power, then we can get into trouble pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think about when we're talking about grass-fed, for example. Like, I spent maybe a half decade ago. I went around to all my farms in Northern California where I source all of my produce, my dairy, my meat from, and just to make sure they were doing everything they said they were doing, right? And the people don't realize the amount of time that takes. And part of it was because grass-fed became, a moniker, right? But then what I had to find out is like they were grass-fed, but they weren't grass-finished. So now we have to like think about two terms. And correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding was like, yeah, they're raised out in grass-fed environments, but then the last 60 to 90 days, they're moved into pens closer to like the abattoir to be harvested, and then they're fed on corn to fatten them up and increase the weight as they go into finishing. So am I curious that when you say grass-fed and grass-finished, are you taking them off the roaming range when you go to grass finish? And like, what time are they then spending? Is it then on, hay and silage, or like, what's the transition from grass fed to grass finished?
That's a great question. I'd say that for a consumer, the way that I like to think about it, you want to focus on pasture raised, grass fed, and grass finished. And so pasture raised means that the animal has been living out on the grass in the pasture its whole life. Grass fed means that that's what it's been eating, that's what's been going on. And grass finished means that it's not receiving something other than grass prior to harvest. And so if an animal gets into some type of confined location and gets put on corn for the final 30 days, the flavor profile will be very different than it will a grass fed and grass finished cow. A lot of consumers like the sweetness that, say, a corn or silage, finish might bring to the table, and some people prefer that to grass-fed and grass-finished beef, and that's just at least from a flavor perspective, that's just somebody's preference. So, for us, how we like to operate is they're out on pasture their whole lives, and then typically the cattle that's in our beef program, those would be cull cows from our cow-calf program. So if a mother cow has a calf and does not breed back, then she would be a cull cow. So that mother cow is going to turn into grass-fed, grass-finished beef. So the final bit of her life to make sure that the flavor profile is strong and that the quality of the meat and everything else is there, we want to make sure that they're finished on high quality forage. And so we're going to stick them on some of the best finishing ground that we have, but we will also give them free choice to have other types of hay available depending on what time of year it is. But for us, we will not put them in a confined location to finish them. Different operators do things differently for different reasons. And depending on what the consumer wants, an operator may make one choice versus another.
Do you have anything locally, or do you supplement with anything random as like a small percentage of their diet, like lupins or acorn, like trying to like just have a different flavor profile at the very end? Or is there anything unique there, or am I just hoping that there's some secret sauce?
No, we talk about this stuff all the time. So all of these craft brewers in Colorado have all of the spent barley and everything else. And so one of our restaurant partners up north, who's a Land to Market restaurant. Land to Market is the Savory Institute's program for producers and buyers that are looking for regenerative goods. And whether it's UGG boots or Timberland looking for regenerative leather, or it's say a restaurant like Carita that wants regenerative beef and everything in between. That restaurant group, they're very interested because they know a lot of the craft brewery guys, and they're like, hey, this is just, they have to pay for somebody to take this away. They would give it to you for free if you would come pick it up. let's try to figure out how to do this. And with diesel being expensive and, with how quickly those spent grains will spoil and things like that, we're trying to work through some of those roadblocks to figure out how to make it work. But I think it's pretty intriguing to use other products to alter the flavor profile in, say, the final 30 or 60 days. We do also have oat hay for a diverse diet. We have a very, biologically diverse piece of ground here as well as in Texas. And so when it snows in Texas, for example, the sagebrush is also there as an option to forage. And somebody would say, I can't believe they would eat sagebrush, but when there's nothing else around and that's in the ground, that's going to happen. The smell of sagebrush is a little bit different, but that's inherently going to have an impact on that animal. I don't know how long that'll stick around in terms of a flavor profile and how much it takes exactly. And so those are some of the things that we're trying to work through right now with some of our restaurant partners, because we think that we do have the ability to stay within our ethos of as land managers, and to create something that might be a better steak on the plate for the consumer.
Yeah, I'm sure you've probably seen this too. Is like in Spain, you have a guy that grows some of the most ethically raised foie gras in the world, right? Where he's actually not even gorging them.
Hello, my lovelies.
Yeah, he's creating like the Disneyland of foraging for his geese, and one of those was the yellow lupin plants that created the yellowish hue or tint to the livers that people came to expect from foie gras, and he just figured it out from having them, forage lupins in when they're out in the pastures. So, another two-part question for you. What do you say, like, because you brought it up with the grass finished taste difference between corn finished, and your wife's is a chef. So, like, what do you usually tell people that usually have, hesitation about the different flavor profiles of actually grass finished? I'm just curious of what you guys tell them. And part of that is, like, can you tell the difference between male and female cattle when you're actually tasting your end steak or ribeye, et cetera?
So I think in terms of the description of grass-fed versus conventional beef, one of the things that I really focus on is maybe less so on flavor profile and comes down to cooking technique. And so Abby will be one of the first people to tell you, you have to babysit grass-finished beef when you're cooking it. You can't put it on the grill and walk away and forget about it. Conventional beef is very forgiving. In fact, the executive chef at the restaurant group down in New Mexico, he and I were talking about this the other day, because they always have turnover in line cooks and things like that. And hey, here's how you cook this burger to the best of your ability. Make sure you have your timer on and follow these techniques. And so I generally think that you can have a phenomenal grass-fed, grass-finished flavor profile that people won't know that's what they're eating if it's cooked right. If it's overcooked and it's dry and whatever else, say there's a difference in the fat content or the marbling or what have you, then cooking technique is really where you need to go. So I generally talk more in cooking technique than I do flavor profiles. I've had people in the past say things like, well, it kind of tastes gamier. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And they're like, well, it's maybe a little bit tougher or something like that. And again, I think that oftentimes comes down to cooking technique than it does actually what's there. And so you can overcook a conventional beef, conventional steak just as well as doing it on a grass finished one. So what kind of marinade do you have? What are you doing a reverse sear? What are you doing to actually make that be what it should? And generally speaking, we kind of default to what is the simplest thing. And so if I've got two kids and they're really hungry, I need things to happen fast. And so just like anybody else, I'll get something off of the grill and onto their plate really fast and whatever else. And I'm going to err on the side of undercooking, especially with grass-fed and grass-finished beef as opposed to anything else. I think the other thing too that just in talking about changes in the ways that animals are being raised over the years, like go back to World War II, lamb mutton, things like that was something that a lot of people didn't really have a good taste to it and whatever else, and kind of like a generation almost turned off to lamb. Fast forward to today, there are a number of incredibly good lamb producers like Capra and, Aaron Cook, people that are doing phenomenal things. Shout out to Aaron Cook. So, what Capra's doing, they're doing regenerative ag as well. And so they have phenomenal tasting lamb. And so kind of a whole bunch of people who are, say boomers' children, whether they're, millennials or, whatever they are, they're all of a sudden waking up to this whole, new flavor profile out there, something that they actually really enjoy. And so I think, to have a difference in the point of view about, raising the animals, I think it's creating opportunity for people to find new flavors that they really like.
Yeah, I'm not as maybe open when people say gaminess. I'm like, you mean it tastes like a real animal? And maybe that's not what you're accustomed to, but like stripping out the nuance from the cooking side. Obviously every piece of meat's different in nuance, but in general, I always think about with grass finished, you either want to go real low and slow, or you want to cook a lot faster than you would like corn finished beef. Like those are kind of quick rules of thumb. Would you agree to that?
I totally agree with that. Yeah. And if you don't have a sous vide and you want to have a really good steak, get a sous vide and learn how to use that, and then learn how to, finish it on the grill to get that sear, and it will be amazing.
No, that's an excellent piece of advice. If anybody wants to step their game up, like sous vide is actually, and what's great about sous vide, everybody starts getting intimidated just because of maybe the French phrasing, but like it actually is like almost idiot proof. It's like the best way of cooking things, and you don't actually need a lot of technique because you just put the sous vide on, set it, forget it, and then just finish it when you're done. And so it's great. But one of the things you pointed out that I was remiss that I missed earlier is it's really fascinating to me when I looked at the studies of grass finished versus grain finished. Is like you're saying, not only you're changing the fat content, but you're changing the fat profile. It's really affecting your omega-3 to omega-6 ratios. And what's amazing to me is like looking at those studies is like how just a certain amount of days can dramatically affect that omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. So once again, it's about what are you putting into your body, and what are the cooking techniques and flavor profiles that provides, but more importantly, what's the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio that you're putting in your body. And just a few days on corn can dramatically affect that more than you'd ever realize.
It sure can. Yeah, no, and that's a great point as well. And I think that, a lot of people make the choice based on taste. Some are making it based on their health and what their dietary needs are. There are a lot of different ways that people find their way to different types of beef. And I think that however somebody gets there, it's okay, right? Just in my opinion, it's just the place where you want to be. These animals are genetically engineered to live off of grass. And yes, you can alter flavor profiles and finish faster and all these other things doing it other way. But I believe that these animals were designed to live on grass, and they're ruminants with 4-chamber stomach, and it's just what it is. So, philosophically, that's where we lie and what we really believe in. And, if I go to a restaurant and I order a burger, I can generally tell pretty quickly that it's a conventional beef versus a grass-fed one, just because I eat it all the time. And I think you asked another question a little while ago about, can you tell the difference between a male and a female, so a steer and a heifer? Gosh, maybe Abby could. She's cultivated such a more discerning palate than myself, so maybe she could do that. But I will say that we've tried to discern whether or not there's a difference in taste of a beef that went through an abattoir versus a beef that was a field harvest on the ranch. And it's almost unfair because I know what's what, but I'd say if I had my druthers, the field harvest would be the way to go. Per USDA law, we can't, sell a field harvested beef to a restaurant partner or whatever else. But, that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, we're gonna get deep on that one. Yeah, because it's like I try to look at studies too. We're worried about like adrenaline and cortisol and other things, whether it's going through an abattoir or it's field harvested. And, from my study, I'm curious if you have a pushback on this, is like, it seems to like dissipate so quickly that it doesn't matter in like the finished product on the meat side. But then what you're talking about that people don't realize is like, if you're going to sell meat publicly, you have to go through a USDA approved abattoir or harvesting facility. And there's only like 5 of them like regionally in the country. And actually a lot of them shut down during COVID, which is even a bigger problem. But like, you actually cannot necessarily like harvest the cattle in a more humane way than you want to because of the regulations on the USDA side.
That's correct, and that's definitely something that I'd say politicians are waking up to, and something that is getting more attention. For excuse me, for the big packing houses, it's a factory, right? And they have what they do, and there's a bunch of people, and they know one cut, and then they move on, and that's kind of what it is. Whereas a small processor that might only do 10 a day or something like that, there's just a couple of people that are out there breaking down the entire animal. And so, to have that person, I think that person has a lot of knowledge when it comes to butchery. And it's kind of a lost art form, with the production line mentality that we have here, and speed and efficiency. So, but at the same time, it can be hard to work with the smaller processors because, you might have a restaurant partner that needs a very specific cut done a very certain way, and they may not have that knowledge. And so actually one of our restaurant partners is educating themselves from the butchery side of things so that they know the language to be able to bridge that gap in between restaurant language and abattoir language, so that they can actually get what they want, where a certain cut is not over trimmed or whatever the case may be. And so I think there is an opportunity to work locally with the smaller processors, but ultimately, for the scale that a restaurant needs and the on-demand needs of a restaurant, it can be pretty hard for them to work with a producer like us. If they can call their food purveyor up at midnight and the next day they got 25 tomahawk ribeyes that show up, that's as convenient as it gets for them. Whereas I'm saying to them, hey, a year from now or 6 months from now or whatever it is, here's, let's do some menu planning and let's figure this out so that you can, have exactly what you want. And it can be the best plate of food that your customer has that differentiates you from your competitor. Because if there's, I don't know, a couple dozen steakhouses all in the same city, say Denver, for example, or Amarillo or something, well, what makes you different compared to everybody else? And so that's where a lot of people are trying to get an edge by working directly with somebody like us. But then all of a sudden we're playing a bunch of different roles, which have all been displaced by food purveyors and other things. So logistically, it can be pretty complex.
Yeah, I think part of it is like you're trying to educate the restaurateur, but also at the same time, you almost have to educate the end customer, because thankfully, like the nose to tail movement has caught on. So people are starting to understand that better. Cause like you're saying, it's like, if you sell tomahawks and those are the sexy steaks, well, that's only a small part of a cow. Luckily, I mean, we know how to harvest all the other pieces and parts and every little, piece to the animal, but like it's getting people to think outside of maybe just a tomahawk or a T-bone or ribeye, and try to really, create better flavor profiles and education from other parts of the animal that can be just as good depending on what dish you're trying to create. But just put a finer point on it. I'm curious if you think we're talking about field harvesting versus an abattoir processor. Do you think we're anthropomorphizing, like just having the lineup of animals in a chute, and we're worried about what that does to their chemical balance before they get harvested? Or do you think, is there any data behind that, or do you think that's just our general feeling?
I've read various opinions over the years about the spikes in cortisol that and adrenaline that a cow may receive in a stressful situation, and does that actually affect flavor profile or not? I don't know if there's enough data on that, and I don't know if there's a preeminent authority on flavor profile that is published on that front. I'd be really interested to read it or to even contribute to the study in some way. But ultimately, I think the idea of a happy cow that's out in the field where the lights just turn out is very different than loading the animal onto the trailer, driving it 100 miles or something like that. Some people have to drive them 100 miles, and then it going into a strange place, and then what happens. Two very different experiences, and like you said, maybe we're anthropomorphizing things, but ultimately, I think as consumers, ultimately there's a lot that we can do as consumers. If I'm the consumer, there's a lot I can do to ensure that cow lived a happy life, and I can feel good about that. One of the things that I generally say about this business to people that aren't involved in this business is our cows only have one bad day. They've got one bad day, and that's it. Every other day, they're taken care of. They're fed. They have water. They have sunshine. They can go eat whatever they want. If it's early season and cheatgrass is coming up, they can eat on that. And if it's late season and the sedge isn't bitter anymore, and the pH has changed in that grass, they can go eat that. And all of a sudden, the leaves on the gimble oak are no longer toxic, and so they can eat that safely at this time of year, and those types of things. But at the same time, if it snows real heavy in the spring, the only thing that's green are those oaks. They're going to go towards them, and they can get poisoned and die. So there's tough stuff all around with the free forage movement in raising animals. But at the end of the day, I think we all would like to have a. It's kind of like that Portlandia episode, if you remember it, where they're ordering chicken at the restaurant. Like, can we meet the chicken? I want to meet the chicken. It's kind of like that. It's somewhat tongue in cheek, but I think that the point is salient that we all, especially these days, it seems like people want to have a connection to the food that's on their plate, and they want to understand where it came from, how it was raised, and those sorts of things.
Yeah, just like Gen Z and millennials want a story from even like a clothing brand they buy. Like everybody, thankfully, is like trying to learn more about the supply chain of everything they consume. You brought it up, so I don't mind kind of alienating everybody in a way. But like you said, like ruminant animals with 4-chamber stomachs and their ability to process grass is like, in essence, at a 30,000 foot level, we're all living off of like solar energy, right? And to me, a ruminant animal 4-chamber stomach is a great vegetarian because they can process that vegetarian into protein that then I can eat. So it's just a step removed in between that they're much better at like processing that solar energy through vegetarianism. And then by us eating it, like we're getting that vegetarianism and that solar energy. And similarly with fish too, with the smaller fish eating plankton and algae, larger fish, and then we consume the larger fish. It's kind of that cascade through the system. But maybe people don't want to necessarily deal with that. One of the other questions I had for heifers versus steers. Do you see any marbling difference with heifers?
So steers grow bigger, faster, and so let's just say that I've got a group like I do right now that are designated as beef cows, and so I've got a group that are steers and a group that are heifers. The first set that's going to go to harvest are going to be the steers. And then the slower growing, smaller heifers are going to bring up the rear. It takes them a little bit longer to get to the same place. A lot of people.
About how many months each?
So a conventional beef is probably going to be somewhere in the 18-month range. And so we're going to be more in the 24 to 30-month category is where we're going to be. And so the steers are probably going to be a little bit earlier, and the heifers are going to be a little bit later. And sometimes a cow has a small steer, sometimes they have a big heifer. Things can change a little bit, but we would like to try to have a uniform group as best we can, and so good genetics plays a big part of that. And I think that in terms of marbling and things like that, a lot of people are going to argue pretty strongly that they would prefer a steer over a heifer any day of the week. I think that the best beef that we ever had was from a cull cow that was in a pasture for one reason or another with a nursing cow, and that that cull cow was robbing milk from the mother cow. And so all of those extra vitamins and minerals and everything else were going into number 675. I still remember her number, your tag 675. And so that we kept her for ourselves. That was the rancher's reserve. And so, you know, a mutual friend of yours and mine was by the ranch a little while ago, and he had some of the fillets from that one. And I was like, I can show you a picture. You know, here's a picture of that one. I loved her so much.
Man, now I'm gonna be searching flights right now. I gotta taste 675. But you know, part of what is the and then obviously part of that too is what breeds of cattle do you raise?
We focus primarily on Angus for the mother cows, and we do have some Simmental Angus cross cows as well. And then the bulls that we had turned out this season were full-blooded registered Wagyu. And so a 50-50 mix between the Wagyu bull and the Angus cow would be an American Wagyu calf. And so American Wagyu is a popular type of beef because it's incredibly rich, it's incredibly fatty, but at the same time, it's not so rich that you can't eat a whole lot of it. So if you ever go to a nice steakhouse and you order the A5 Wagyu from Japan, you probably get something like 2 ounces for $150. That is so rich. I mean, some people can eat a lot of it. I can't. You know, 2 to 4 ounces, and I'm tapped out. You know, I don't want my skin to crawl. But it's incredibly rich and flavorful and amazing. But like that, American Wagyu ribeye, it might be kind of like a 50-50 meat to fat ratio. You might cut off a fair bit here and there, but it's so rich, it's so juicy, it's really good. And so the steakhouse might sell that for $150 too. And so the American Wagyu product I like quite a bit. I think it's pretty interesting. And so we do have that as a part of our business. We so those calves specifically are for the American Wagyu program. If that mother cow is a cull cow because she doesn't breed back, then that's going to be a grass-fed Angus. Franklin's Barbecue down in Austin, one of the things I heard on their masterclass was that Black Angus, grass-fed, grass-finished Black Angus is the closest thing possible to a conventional beef that's out there, like where maybe you can't even tell the difference or what have you. And so, whether that's just one person's opinion or that's actually gospel, that's for each person to decide. But our restaurant partners that are, going for the Angus product, that's, where that is.
Yeah, I think I told you about somebody here locally that started with Scottish Highland cattle and then decided to crossbreed with Angus. But you and I both know that's the same bloodline, so it's a little bit odd to me to be reintroducing a lower form of the bloodline.
Yeah, just a furry one versus a with the horns versus a slicker backed one. That's kind of funny. Yeah, hairy coos are so adorable. They make mini ones too. I think I might have to get my wife one as a birthday present next year.
Oh man, I wish you wouldn't have told me that, because I there's a mini horse farm near here, and it makes me laugh every time I drive by. So, a mini haircut would just make me just overjoyed. But I want to talk a little bit about, because you brought up pricing power earlier, so I want to kind of talk a little bit of the business side, and then I think about often if we have a transition back to regenerative farming, or if we don't, or if population keeps growing and we never have population attrition, part of it might be that protein becomes an extremely luxury good. And so, maybe I'm saving money here or there, but then maybe I have to spend, $100 on a fillet or a steak. And that's just part of making money in this world is you're actually going to be spending a good portion of it on getting the highest quality protein you can, because it's maybe becomes a scarce commodity. But I think part of that is, your efforts to really tell this story, to do everything right, is you have to tell that story and you have to go direct to consumer. And like you said, luckily people want to know where that animal is coming from, what their life cycle's been like. And originally people started maybe doing cow shares to get people to buy other parts of it, or just maybe actually be able to take the cow in aggregate. So tell me about like how you think about that pricing power because you have specialty breeds, because you're telling that story, and you guys have been doing a phenomenal job on Instagram. Highly recommend people follow XIT Ranch on Instagram. But like, what do you like? Did you try cow shares at first, and then you decided people want specific cuts, or how did that evolve on the sales side of the process?
Starting off, we did more of a direct to consumer model than what we have now. And in that model, we were generally doing subscriptions, and it was by weight. And then each month there would be a different set of cuts, but probably, say it was a 5 pound or 10 pound box. They're going to get a couple pounds of ground beef every month and things like that, because you need your, meat for meatballs or burgers or whatever. But then we would put in other cuts. Now, part of the value proposition that we brought to the table is that Abby's a chef, and we could also put in recipe cards so that people could try new recipes along with the cut. If they, weren't familiar with what to do with liver, Abby can tell them, and things like that. Or, a lot of people are like, oh, what am I going to do with stew meat or whatever? It's like, well, here's a way that you can use bones to do marrow and things like that. And Abby's really into using the whole animal. And so she's got tacos de lengua as one of the recipes that you can get off of our website and Instagram. And so that was part of how we got started with it. And as we grew, there's a lot of work that goes into the direct-to-consumer subscription box business. And when we wanted to scale up, we wanted to do it a little bit differently. So we focused more on, can we sell by the trailer load or the pot load, or, can we sell, X to a restaurant group? And so working with one restaurant is very different than working with a restaurant group. And so the restaurant group up in the Front Range that we work with, we sell them, say, all the prime cuts out of a bunch of grass-fed and grass-finished Angus cows. They then feather that out to their restaurants based on menu planning and things like that. And so I'll get a nice message from somebody saying, oh, I loved this cut that I had at this restaurant. I didn't even know that was going to be there. I sold to the restaurant group, and then they sent it to this one or they sent it to that one, and things like that. It's nice to get those. And so sometimes I go onto their websites to see what they're actually doing with the beef. And so these days, we're focusing more on larger relationships that allow us to really focus on the best possible, culinary experience for the end consumer. And there are other companies out there that are doing a really good job of filling that gap in between, say, the producer and the direct-to-consumer person buying over the internet. And so I actually had a conversation this morning with some of the land and market guys about one of those companies that wants more regenerative beef. They have demand for it, but they need more producers. And so they basically handle that entire, middle section, so we can send it on a pallet somewhere, and then they've got people that then divvy it up into the boxes and send it out. Because trying to get dry ice when you live in the middle of nowhere is a little bit difficult. And so there are some headwinds to that. I mean, I looked at like, what do I have to do to have my own dry ice factory and things like that. But in terms of the pricing power, what I don't want to do is price out people who need high quality protein. And so we still do have some friends that we sell cows to. A friend picked up a whole cow last weekend that we had butchered. And so we do still do a little bit of that. But one of the ways that we make sure that high quality protein is working its way into the system, irrespective of price, is that we donate a lot of beef to local food banks. And so there are a handful of organizations that we regularly donate our high quality, high protein beef to. And so that's one way that we try to stay involved at a more localized level, and in a way where if they can't afford this, we don't want that to stop them from having good health and having good food.
Yeah, it's, as you said, I always love like the CSA box model of like buying by certain weight, and then you get kind of whatever you get, and it's kind of like it's like an episode of Chopped, right? Like, and then with Abby's, recipes, you can kind of figure out new things to make.
Yeah.
But But I always felt like that was just a tiny fraction of the populace. Like most people just want their prime cuts shipped to them the way they want and all that stuff. But then for you, it's like you're basically starting a logistics business, like you're saying, trying to find dry ice and everything. But part of it too, I don't think people realize is like, if you can plan ahead and you can buy like a quarter or an eighth share of a cattle, you can actually get grass-fed, grass-finished prices way down. Like you can get down to like
Oh yeah.
$6 to $12 a pound, depending on like whether you're using burger or prime cuts. And so people are like, well, people can't afford it. It's like if you could just pre-plan and buy in larger bulk size,
Yep.
like you can get prices really down, especially if you're able to shop across the country and maybe more than locally. Yeah.
For sure.
Sorry,
That's a great point. And it's a great point. And there are a lot of wonderful producers doing, raising animals the same way that we do, that have scaled their business and are doing $1 million a year in that type of business. And they've got large families and they can do it that way, and it works for them. And my hat's off to them. I only have 2 kids and they're not that old. And, so it's harder for me to compete with them where they've got a lot of kids and they're older. Right. But all kidding aside, I think that one of the big misnomers is how much freezer space people think it takes to have a quarter of a cow or something like that. And so if you have a chest freezer in your garage, it's probably one of the best investments you could ever make for yourself. It might cost you 30, 40, $50 a year in energy to have that freezer, but all of a sudden you're buying grass-fed beef at a 30% discount to what it would cost buying it one cut at a time at the store. So it's something that makes a lot of sense to me. And even before, we were a producer, we had 2 chest freezers in our garage. And, there are a lot of people that were getting metered at the grocery store during COVID because of the co-packer problems, or not the co-packer, the packing house problems that you alluded to when they shut down during COVID. Well, people who'd been buying a quarter half full of beef and had that in their freezer, they were fine for the couple months of quarantine. They had all the high protein beef that they could have ever wanted. It's just sitting right there. So then all of a sudden, a lot of people started cooking the cuts that they wouldn't usually do. Everyone goes for like the nice cuts first because it's their favorites, and then at the end of the quarter share or whatever it is, it's like, what do I do with this cut? What do I do with that cut? That was the time when people learned. Just like sourdough starter. You probably a sourdough starter that you started during quarantine too, right?
No, I'm thankfully not that bad. But like chest freezers, and then I love getting like the vegetable CSA boxes. It's like, what the hell am I going to do with this? And then you got to, like, thankfully for YouTube and Google, it makes it so much easier now. But speaking of offcuts, I'm a one-man band. I'm trying to promote suadero tacos. Those are my favorite locally, and I'll send you and Abby some recipes for suadero, and that's my favorite form of beef taco. But thinking about this, I heard an anecdote the other day. Tell me if this is true. I heard you're never supposed to ask a rancher how many head of cattle they have, because that's like looking into their wallet.
That's correct. Yes, 100%. And don't ask them how many acres as well. Those are some big no-nos. Yeah. Some people get pretty upset about that.
Because I can figure out what like the dress weight price is for cattle and then multiply it by how many cattle you have, so I know exactly what your net worth is. Is that the general?
Yeah, I mean, your bank account's sitting out in the field over there, right? It's a very personal thing, and so whether it's the price per acre or it's the price per pound or whatever, it's there's a lot of transparency there, and so yeah, asking somebody those questions is like, how many dollars do you have in equities, or things like that. It's a pretty personal question.
Exactly. So I was thinking about it as like, everybody says farm to table now, but I was trying to think like you went from finance to farmer, or more specifically finance to rancher. So like, let's get into like, why did you make that decision? You come from a financial family and everything, and you run your own finance businesses. Why did you want to get back into ranching? Or I said back into, because I know kind of the story, but like, tell me what made you step out of the corporate world and get into ranching? And then from there, maybe we could tell the XIT story through the years as well.
Mm-hmm. Ranching is the ultimate macro trade, is the short.
Volatility for the end of the world. It's like the Hugh Hendry, St. Bart's house kind of thing.
Exactly. Gosh, there are a lot of different answers to that question. I think when I worked in finance, I always sought hobbies that were tangible, where there would be a completed project tangible project at the end, like making a table, for example. I made a dining room table once. And I really enjoyed that process because I had something, at the end of it that I could look to and point to, whereas markets go up a little bit one day, they go down the next, and whatever else. And depending on how you're judged, maybe you don't know how you did for 10 years or something like that. And so ranching is very tangible. It's very hands-on. You see these animals get born, you raise them, and then you sell them later or what have you. And so there's a journey that you go and, like with the ranch down in Texas, we've had to mend a lot of fence down there, miles and miles of fence. And you can look down that fence when you're done, after hours of work, and you can see the completion of it. And then it holds your animals where they're supposed to be, because cows are always getting out. It's what they do. If there's a fence they can try to squirm through, they're going to do it. So, I'd say that for me, a lot of it came down to the tangible nature of fulfillment. And I love markets, and the horse market is another market. Cattle's another market. There are all these different things. They're just other markets, and navigating them and figuring out how to put the puzzle pieces together. So, like I said, it's one big macro trade. You've got a commodity linked business. You've got real estate. You've got financing. You've got just all these different things going at one time. I mean, shoot, right now there's now a carbon market. So if I measure how much carbon I'm capturing into the soil, I can sell that into a market because we now have a price on carbon. So there are all these things that exist in this that really scratch a lot of itches that I have in terms of professional fulfillment, but in a tangible way.
Yeah, I want to even get into carbon sequestration later, but this is why I wanted to have you on, because to me, it's all trading and investing and finance. Like, there's no difference. It's just like different kind of formats. But what do you think though is more stressful, the vicissitudes of financial markets or the vicissitudes of weather and nature and all that? But at least you get the satisfaction at the end of the day, feeling like you did something.
There's some days when I wonder why I'm doing this and not sitting in front of a Bloomberg terminal. And then there are other days where I'm really thankful that I'm not sitting in front of a screen all day. Somebody asked me recently kind of how much time is split between the two, and it changes based on what workflow needs are and things like that. And getting ready to ship cattle down to Texas from Colorado, it was like a 4 a.m. to 10 p.m. week-long stretch to get ready to do that, and horseback the majority of the time, and some of the hardest work you could imagine, but some of the most enjoyable, fun times at the same moment. And so, there are trades that I'm involved in the financial markets that I enjoy a lot. And, maybe it's, Eurodollar futures or options on Eurodollar futures. There's all sorts of things that I can do that I really can dial in on and have a lot of fun with. But at the end of the day, to have the satisfaction of raising the animal and selling it for a good price and making good margin on everything else, there's a lot of fulfillment there that's very different than financial markets. And so I think that's something. I'd say also the ability to model hard work for my children and for them to be able to learn off of the land is something that's very important, because when my kids were little, and they're 12 and 7 now, but when they were very little, I didn't really know how to teach them what I did. And so I came up with a game. I said, okay, we're going to have a scavenger hunt. And the scavenger hunt led my older of the two, who's old enough at the time to do this, to find some Nike sneakers that were in her closet and, different public company goods, right? And then we were able to, put them down and have a conversation about fractional ownership of the company, all being a shareholder and all this stuff and the earnings and dividends. And she just looked at me. She's like, I don't understand what you're talking about. I thought I'd come up with such a great idea as to, how to explain this, that when you buy these sneakers, if I'm a shareholder, I'm entitled to, a little fraction of those cash flows and whatnot. And she just didn't get it. Whereas now, the baby calf comes out, the baby calf gets big, the baby calf goes away, rinse and repeat, it makes a lot more sense. So I think there's a big bit of that for me in it. I do at times miss managing money, professionally, because I did really enjoy that and I took a lot of pride in it. But at this stage, I am really enjoying building our ranching business, and the employees that we're hiring and the decisions that we're making are very complex. And so I have a lot of enjoyment for this. But as you know, as we talk about sometimes on the side, the grass is always greener. And sometimes I'm like, gosh, I should do a fund because this idea, carbon related is so cool and investors should be all over this and whatever else. But, then I come back to my senses when people tell me, no, stay outside on that horse all day. It's a way better thing. So it's kind of funny, to still sort of span the two worlds, but not professionally managing money for other people. It's a gift not to be doing that, and to be outside ranching all day is a lot of fun. But at the same time, I have to run the business, which means when we switch payroll, like we did a couple weeks ago, and 2 people didn't get paid, I'm then running around on a Friday afternoon, to make sure people have money in their accounts, but that's just part of life for any business owner.
Yeah, I would say just theoretically, now you're just a discretionary global macro trader. And I would think, yes, at least through your physical exhaustion, you at least sleep better at night than I do, just staring at screens and living in this digitized, financialized world. But I think this is a good spot. I know you've told it a million times, but can you tell us about like the history of XIT Ranch and how it started and how it got to where you are today?
So my family, this branch of the family was in Chicago, and the Farwell brothers originally hailed from Steubenville, New York, and they moved west to the Chicago area pre-Civil War. And John V. Farwell, my third great grandfather, had a dry goods merchant business in Chicago that did quite well and had a lot of pricing power. We'll come back to pricing power. And post-Civil War boom, that business did pretty well. And he had partners such as Marshall Fields, who then took the dry goods merchant wholesaling business to the next level and had the, had the department store. And so when John V.'s brother, Charles, heard from another politician, so John V. Farwell served in both the House and the Senate, Charles B. Farwell did, he heard from one of his friends from Texas that they needed a new state capitol building and they were going to finance it by a land swap. Their ears perked up. And so keep in mind, these guys are a little bit older at the time. They've just rebuilt Chicago post the huge fire. And, a lot of guys might not want to take on such a big endeavor, but they did. So there were 3 proposals, 3 architects threw their hat in the ring for the state capitol building in Austin, what would be the new state capitol building in Austin. The Farwells really wanted that deal, so they backed 2 out of 3 of them, and one of those 2 got picked. And so in return for building the state capitol in Austin, my family received 3 million acres in the panhandle of Texas. And today, if you watch Austin City Limits, you see the state capitol building in the background, and there it is. It's still there today. The financing of it is a pretty interesting story. So at the time, unless something was quoted on an exchange, no bank would lend on it. And so this is 1870s or so, mid to late 1870s. Early 1880s. And so unless it was quoted on exchange, they wouldn't lend on it. So they couldn't find anyone to land on the dirt. And what was that dirt? It was nothing. It was raw land. Nobody lived there. It was empty. And so John V. had offices over in Europe and a lot of contacts in London. So he went to London and he raised 3.5 million sterling in debt in the Capital Freehold Land and Investment Company, used that sterling, converted the sterling back into dollars. So we've got a foreign exchange trade here. So you can see where I get this stuff, right? It's one big macro trade. And they converted into dollars. They built the state capitol building. They then sold off later in the late 1890s. They sold off some of the land to repay the note holders in the UK. And so, the difference between that, was how much the family was left with at that point in time. And Charles died, I'm going to say, in 1903. John V died in 1909, and the business was still going in Chicago. And so, there's, I guess at the time was when maybe family offices were becoming in vogue. They had that business and they had other things going on. And so the ranch was another portfolio position in today's words. And so they continued to ranch it until 1912. And then in 1912, the cattle were sold, and the family decided to go into the land leasing business and the land sales business. And so their original vision was always to colonize that area and to and for Americans to be able to move west, have a plot of land that they could farm and ranch on and provide for themselves and be able to make a living for themselves as the population grew and the West was explored and everything else. And so they really had this idea of self-actualization and people being able to provide for themselves and make a life for themselves. And so from 1912 to 1963, land was leased out and sold. And in 1963, the last of it was sold. So for the last 59 years, my family had been ranching until we purchased the ranch outside of Channing, Texas, just in the last months. And so we have XIT branded cattle running on original XIT ranch lands right now. And it's a pretty exciting thing for us. After 110 years, we've got XIT cattle running around again. And so to me, it's very fulfilling. I view my role in all of this as that of a steward. And it's my job to take care of the land and while it's my turn. And what happens after I'm gone, I don't know. But hopefully I raise my children with the right mindset to be stewards as well. And not this weekend, next weekend is the XIT Rodeo and Reunion. In 1936, a bunch of the, we'll call them alumni, the former employees, started a rodeo and reunion, and it's still going today. And I talked to the president of the board yesterday, and we're going to be down there, and everybody's all excited. It's a big PRCA rodeo, and we're going to go and thank them for keeping the history alive all of these years. And they're just so excited that a descendant of the family is back running, XIT again. I mean, it's pretty neat, because what a lot of people don't realize, Jason, is that prior to what we did in the Panhandle, nothing existed there. So there were 0 railroad lines going through that area, 0, period. By the time John V died, there were 4 rail lines going through the property. And I know he was really proud of that. And that meant a lot to him, and the family's taken a lot of pride as to what it meant for westward expansion and the colonization of our country. And a lot of people don't understand that on that ranch, about, 6-7 miles away probably, there's one of those rail lines, and I can hear the rumble of those trains going, the way it kind of goes and comes down this valley. I can hear it. When I first got there, I'm thinking, is this, wind turbines that I can see on the horizon? What is this? Figured out it was the railroad. So it's pretty cool to be able to hear that from that property. And so that's in our Rita Blanca division. And it was the mare pasture back then. And so it's pretty exciting for us, given our horse program and what we're doing with our cattle, to be back down there. And so today we want to do the best job we can do to take care of that land and to carry the torch for the XIT, and to honor the past and the legacy is really important to us.
And it's such an amazing story. And I was hoping you tell even the financing tangent too, because like you and I have done many speculative investments that we've had bankers try to finance, and it's so hard on modern times to get bankers to financing anything. I can't imagine taking a steamship to Europe to try to convince Europeans and then it comes full circle because it shows like how you love trading euro dollar markets, right? So it's just
Yeah.
like it's like the original almost euro dollar market, even though it's more of an FX exchange from sterling back to dollars. But it's an
Yeah.
interesting part of the story. And I can't imagine, I know how proud you were to rebrand XIT, even with the Colorado ranch. But now, and to watch like how excited you've been in the last few months to bring back to raising cattle on the original XIT land. I mean, it's just kind of amazing to watch it coming full circle. And like you said, you being the stewardship of that. But part of that is I'm going to like kind of finish talking about is the modern version of ranching, so to speak. So it comes full circle with our conversation is, we were originally talking about what's the difference between grass-fed, grass-finished, et cetera. Like you really got to learn these names. And unfortunately, there's no good names for anything, right? Like we've talked about organic, regenerative, all these different forms of naming conventions that people are trying to figure out. And so part of it is, you and I have privately talked about this a lot, is the idea with ruminant animals and hooves systems and everything is it's part of an ecological system that, they create indentations in the grass or in the land with their hooves that then larvae can, kind of facilitate and water can combine within those hoof systems. And then you have, the chickens can come in and feed off those larvae and how it creates kind of a full cycle system. But more importantly is also then even the way that the teeth structure of cattle are used to even rip grass is a form of regenerative farming. And it creates, like we were alluding to earlier, it creates a permaculture where you're maintaining or building the integrity of the soil and the microbiome that lives in the soil, which provide us better nutrients as humans when we harvest these animals. But one of the biggest part of it that you mentioned is if done properly with regenerative farming and building that permaculture, you have a form of carbon sequestration. And now that we have these modern carbon markets, you could be using those ranch lands to get credit for the carbon sequestration. So it kind of tell me, like, I know you and I have texted back and forth about you having even people come out to assess ranch lands that you're looking to buy and see what the carbon sequestration impacted would be, and if you could sell those credits into different marketplaces.
Yeah. Well, first off, I should say, if we are going to hire a new marketing director, you should throw your hat in the ring first, because you're definitely pretty savvy. As it pertains to the carbon markets, I think there are a couple of different important things in play. The first is the EU has a compliance market, and so they're the the kind of leaders in that space. And we have a voluntary market here in the US and a couple of different regional ones at that. The markets over in the EU, that's an allowance market, meaning you are allowed to burn so many fossil fuels, to emit so many pollutants, right? So it's not, the price of carbon is it's the dirty price. It's not actually the clean price of carbon. And so I think the shift that we ought to see, and maybe it's the U.S. that's the leader in this space, would be that instead of an allowance market, it turns into a sequestration market. And what I mean by that is that if a producer such as myself sequesters carbon into the soil, and there's a verified process for that, and you can say with a high degree of certainty that I'm not going to till it next year and release all the carbon and all this other stuff, right? If you can do it that way, then we're actually starting to turn back the clock a little bit. Whereas if you're going to whittle down, like in the EU compliance regime, for example, they reduce the supply of these allowances every year, which should artificially increase the price of carbon in the EU, for example. And so they're creating a demand curve. That makes a lot of sense to me, but it's still an allowance. So if we want to move to a place where we're actually trying to turn back the clock in terms of what's going on, then I think a sequestration market is where we need to end up going with this. And I think, frankly, we have the capabilities to do that, but we need a national standard. Right now, there's, 4 or 5 different registries that have their own standard. Shoot, you can even buy a Bitcoin with a carbon credit wrapped around it right now. There's all sorts of crazy stuff that's out there, so just a fig leaf of carbon is wrapped around a Bitcoin. So you've got a net zero token when it comes to the energy usage to create a single Bitcoin. I find that to be fascinating, but I digress. I think that the fact that farmers and ranchers can have another outlet to monetize their land is what's really important here, because with government subsidies and all these other things, we have a lot of pricing that is not as free as one might expect in various commodity markets. And so if we can create an opportunity for somebody to have one more source of revenue off of an existing piece of land, then maybe they can make ends meet, and they don't have to sell land to live, which you do see a lot of that these days, where old ranching families are having a hard time making ends meet, and they might have to sell land in order to do so, which is pretty sad. It used to be that you could, run a cow-calf operation and be profitable, and that was it. Now you need 3, 4, 5 different sources of revenue in order to be successful as a rancher. And so I'm not just a rancher. We've got horses, we've got cattle, we've got we're going into merchandise. Hopefully we'll be doing the carbon stuff. On and on. Outfitter. We're going to be selling hunts and things like that. So all of a sudden you have to be in all these different businesses at one time, which that takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of people to pull off. So, I think carbon is one of those things that could be one more lever to pull and to be pretty profitable. I know some guys that have organic farmland in the Mississippi Delta that are really excited about it, and they've got a bunch of acreage that they just have to now quantify what's happening underneath it, and they can monetize that, and that's good for them. It's good for their investors and whatnot. So I'm very much for it. I'm not for regulation per se, so I wouldn't mind it staying a voluntary market, but going to a sequestration market and having to be something that people want organically, as opposed to it being regulated.
Yeah, I think about one of the things I think you'll love is like the perversions, like the perverse incentives that can even come off the way the European market's structured that I've been looking into is essentially it's a weird like coal play in a way, right? Like if in the UK, if nat gas prices spike, they're going to fire up the coal plants, which means they're going to increase their buying of carbon credits in Europe to offset that. So it's like a perverse way of playing coal, which makes no sense when you're buying like carbon credits, but that's a whole different story. So one of the things that we're going to have to save for a future episode that I was going to get into is like you just said, is like looking at these ranches and figuring out the 6 to 8 different income sources. Like it's been serendipity that we've had the rise of the television show Yellowstone. So I always joke with you that like your text messages are like a living, breathing episode of Yellowstone whenever you're sending text messages when you're looking at ranches to buy and you're flying around in helicopters scoping out the land. But then you'll send me the prospectus and we'll go through, and like you said, it's like it's not only like it's the cattle, it's the horses, it's the water sources, it's how do we create merch out of this, is it like King Ranch working with like Ford or whatever it is, like all these different merch opportunities to like you're saying to like then carbon credits and sequestration is another form. So it's figuring out all the layer cake to make this a going concern. And like we've always talked about lodges and in tourism and all those sorts of things. So it's like I enjoy it immensely, but I always joke with you that getting your texts are just unbelievably enlightening as far as what it's like to live that Yellowstone kind of life. And I'm always the one that's discouraging you from going back into running financial firms. So that's my fault. But one of the things you did bring up that I want to mention is I was thinking about we were talking about what's more stressful, running a financial firm or running a ranch. And you brought up the idea of stewardship, and especially with the history of XIT, is like you think about, I'm just a steward of this land. And I always wondered if that like long now type of thinking actually reduces anxiety and stress, where I'm getting a P&L on an intraday basis, and that's heightening my stress. So I just wonder if just that, what your thoughts are on that longer term form of thinking. Does that, it's in thinking in stewardship terms, does that quell a lot of the anxiety for you?
That's a great behavioral finance question. And so one of the things that became popular during my career was high frequency trading. And the way that I dealt with high frequency trading was to be a low frequency trader. And I can't beat those guys. they're too good at coding, and they've got their hard line in right behind the server at NICE and all that stuff, right? And another fund manager I was talking to about that at one point, he said, I think it probably costs us 100 basis points a year. And I thought to myself, man, that's a lot. So kind of the old how do you beat Bobby Fischer thing, claiming anything but chess. So that was always part of how I like to think about things, to take the other end of the trade. I'll take the long trade, and I'll just let things work out over time. So I think in some ways, when you take on this stewardship mindset, it puts you in a position to start thinking about things in terms of generations or decades, as opposed to the here and the now. Now, fact of the matter is, I got payroll to make, so I have needs for the here and the now today. But if my primary asset, say the land, is going to be chugging along in the background at, 7% a year or something like that, that's okay. That's all right. So then what can I do with all of these other lines of revenue and assets that I have? And so I think that definitely helps us to sleep a little bit better at night, because I'm not so worried about, what's the price of cattle going to do tomorrow or whatever else. I mean, ultimately it impacts us. But if I do a good job taking care of the land and taking care of the animals, they can take care of me. And I always viewed previously that if I did a good job taking care of my clients, they would take care of me as well. And so I think to be able to sleep well at night, sometimes I refer back to reminiscences of a stock operator and selling to the sleeping point. So if I have a position on that is keeping me up at night, then I need to get it to the right size. And what's Jared Dillian say? There's two sizes, too big and too small.
Yeah, exactly. Never, always in hindsight, you're either too big or too small.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah.
So speaking of like sleeping at night or keeping you up at night, I'm sure this is a final question, but I'm sure it's a million things at both of the ranches, and like you even enlightened me to ones I hadn't even thought about before of like when are the leaves are poisonous and are my animals going to eat them at that time of year? But like right at this particular time of year at all the ranches, like what is keeping you up at night? What's on your mind right now?
Right now, what's on my mind is there anything I can do to push this storm system south a little bit so it tags some more of the ranch down in the Panhandle? We've been getting a lot of really good rain in Colorado, and we're only about a 3.5-hour drive to the ranch in Channing, and they're catching kind of the tail end of it down there, so we're getting a little bit of rain. But right now, rain is one of the things that I'm thinking about, because ultimately that really impacts what we can do with the land. And so if it doesn't rain, then the land can't rest. We have to have rain in order for the land to rest. And if if a ranch is capable of, let's say running 500 cows, and in a drought year maybe it's 250 or something like that, then if you're overstocked and you take too many bites out of that apple, then there's nothing left to eat. And so fortunately right now we are understocked down in Texas, where we don't have as much rain right now. And because prices are going down, because a lot of people are destocking right now. And there's pictures on Instagram of mile-long traffic jams on highways of producers with trailers taking their animals to the sale barn right now because they don't have any grass, rain's not coming. People were trying to, see if they could last, and people are just capitulating. And so, there are pockets of prices where they're getting to be pretty inexpensive, but as somebody who's understocked, that's a good thing for me, because now I can stock up and prices are lower. So that helps my P&L. You're talking about your P&L. I still have a P&L, and I need to buy right and I need to sell right. And it's if I buy high and sell low, it's a pretty quick recipe to not do very well. But if I can buy low and sell high, then I'll be better off in the long run. And at our place here in Colorado or at our place down in Texas, we will err on the side of what's best for the land before we will let it drive a financial decision. That might mean that there are financial repercussions for that. But if we don't put the land first, then we're not in it for the right reasons. We're not going to, be able to have this land take care of us over multiple generations.
Like every great trader, you're structuring a counter-cyclical P&L, and that way you can, be there for the long term. So I want to thank you for coming on. We talked about cattle this whole time. We didn't even get into horses and breeding stallions for income. So maybe I can convince you one day to come back on and we'll go over the horse trading and stallion trading and try to enlighten the viewers and listeners to what it's like to also be running a horse business as well. So Drew, I just want to thank you so much for going on.
Yeah,
exactly. Part two later.
Part two. We'll do it. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Jason. Thank you, sir. Good to see you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, we'd appreciate if you would share this show with friends and leave us a review on iTunes, as it helps more listeners find the show and join our amazing community. To those of you who already shared or left a review, thank you very sincerely. It does mean a lot to us. If you'd like more information about Mutiny Fund, you can go to mutinyfund.com. For any thoughts on how we can improve the show or questions about anything we've talked about here on the podcast today, drop us a message via email. I'm Taylor@mutinyfund.com and Jason is Jason@mutinyfund.com, or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at Taylor Pearson ME and Jason is at Jason Mutiny. To hear about new episodes or get our monthly newsletter with reading recommendations, sign up at mutinyfund.com/newsletter.
This podcast is provided for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as legal, business, investment, or tax advice. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own opinions and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Mutiny Fund, their affiliates, or companies featured. Due to industry regulations, participants on this podcast are instructed to not make specific trade recommendations nor reference past or potential profits. Listeners are reminded that managed futures, commodity trading, forex trading, and other alternative investments are complex and carry a risk of substantial losses. As such, they're not suitable for all investors, and you should not rely on any of the information as a substitute for the exercise of your own skill and judgment in making a decision on the appropriateness of such investments. Visit mutinyfund.com/disclaimer for more information.